I couldn't believe my eyes. I'd only been with the company 2 or 3 years. And when I went to work, he was already waiting for me at my desk to ask how a certain experiment had turned out. Today, you'd feel uncomfortable if the top man paid you a visit. But that Sony in those days, far from awkward, it was more like, what a nuisance. Here he is again with his endless questions. It was that intimate.
I think it must have been my brother who said, I found this in a drawer. It's the mission statement, and it's as exciting now as it ever was. I remember that was the first time I ever saw Ibuka-san's mission statement, and I remember thinking to myself, amazing. Ibuka-san's behavior hasn't changed one bit from when he wrote this. That was my first impression. When I saw this, 20 years had passed since it had been written. Normally, the circumstances in a company would have changed considerably. And yet, Ibuka-san's way of being, the behavior I had seen working for him for 15 years, and the spirit described in his mission statement were still perfectly aligned. And as a result, that spirit suffused all of Sony at the time. If the top man's behavior is perfectly in line with the ideal, it doesn't have to be hanging on the wall. It doesn't have to be recited. If the top man's behavior reflects the essence, that spirit really will spread throughout the entire organization and sustain itself.
This is it. This is the one we want. That's the way he liked it. That's why he was so pleased with Kihara, because Kihara would deliver the goods. That's what Ibuka-san really liked. Kihara would produce exactly what he hoped for.
Ibuka-san would say, a certain radio station would like to be able to do so-and-so. He was always thinking aloud about something, and I was always listening. And when we had finished work on a new product, I'd start to think about making the kind of lighter version that Ibuka-san had mentioned. And when I had some spare time, I'd experiment on my own and rig something up. I'd have 5 or 6 of these test products stuffed away under my desk, experimental models. Then one day, Ibuka-san would say, Kihara, a cassette-style portable model would be very handy to have, don't you think? And the next morning, I'd show him something close to what he was imagining from my pile of models. How about this? Is this sort of what you had in mind? He'd say, you figured it out already? He'd be truly overjoyed. Kihara, this is just what I wanted. And off we go again. He was like a happy kid at those moments, and I loved seeing him that way. I loved making him happy. That was an engineer's real pleasure.
If Ibuka was muse and champion to his engineers, Morita was the marketing visionary. He had a keen eye for product and a genius for anticipating the customer's needs.
It comes down to loving the product. And if that product is to truly touch something in the user, the customer, I use the word kinsen, the strings of a koto. If the product is to resonate with the customer, you have to see through to what it is they really want. I've repeated this time and time again, and that ability to perceive is something Ibuka-san and Morita-san were born with, and Sony's success is due to the fact they had this gift.
Walkman was a dramatic example of Morita's uncanny product sense and his power to create new markets. The product began with Ibuka's request to his audio department for a miniaturized player only for his personal use while traveling. The result pleased him, and he showed it to Morita, who tried it at home for a weekend.
He said, "This is definitely a product. It will work." He was clear at that time that he wanted to make this into a product. But we had our doubts because it required headphones. In those days, headphones were mostly for people who were hard of hearing. And for that reason, plainly speaking, there was a kind of negative attitude about them. But Morita-san was absolutely set on making this a product. He said, "Let's make a new fashion out of headphones. Let's make a headphone culture." When we announce new products, the press conference is always held indoors. But Morita-san suggested we take reporters outside to a park or somewhere to show them we will be marketing a product to be used outdoors. He came up with one great idea after another.
Morita ordered a first run of 30,000 units and declared to his skeptical sales force that he would resign as chairman if the product failed to sell.
Americans and Europeans often get angry and accuse us of attacking them with products we make using their inventions. I don't agree with this. If we're talking science or scholarship, then the original discovery is crucial. But I'm a businessman. In business, the discovery or the technology is only a beginning and not an end. What are you going to make using that technology? What kind of product will you make? How will you ensure that it can be used economically by all kinds of people? This product planning and production requires another set of new discoveries. Even when you have a product, when you go to sell it, if it's new, most people out there won't get what's special about it, and they won't buy it. So to market it, to get it to sell, you need brand new discoveries. You need creative marketing.
Morita, well, actually, for the matter, Ibuka, enjoyed their business enormously. And I recall when Ibuka first showed me and some other friends a Walkman model, and he was so proud to show this little toy for him, and he was so eager to show it to us. He was having trouble unwrapping the case, and he was saying that, listen to this, it's just great. And of course he was telling us, how he and Morita developed this despite all the oppositions by the staff people. So in any case, Morita always was having fun doing business. So I once tried to characterize for him his attitude toward business, and Sony for that matter. And I used Hubert Humphrey's famous quote of a politics of joy. And I was telling him that there's a politics of joy. Maybe what you have is a business of joy. And he liked that.
In 1963, to better understand the American market, Morita moved himself and his family to New York. From the beginning, he was at ease with the Americans he encountered and astonishingly effective in his dealings with them.
Whether it's joint ventures or acquisitions or mergers or whatever, or licensing or whatever, Akio could pick up the phone and talk to almost any businessman in America. And instead of this being who is he again, and interpreters and all that sort of stuff, Akio knew these people at the human level, at the personal level, at the trust level. And let's be honest about this. To many American businessmen, the Japanese business culture is a different culture. They don't feel comfortable with it. They don't know them to a large extent as human beings. Akio knew them in that way, and therefore when Akio called, people listened.
Akio Morita, in the first place, had great personal charm and magnetism, so that that always helps in a relationship between people. He made one feel that he enjoyed the company of the person he was in, and I'm sure that the success of Sony in the United States was due in no small part to his personal ability to communicate with the business people, but more broadly with the American public.
You would not distinguish whether he's Japanese or European or American. He would look straight into your eye. He would have these great bright eyes, and he would always just straight look into it, which is very un-Japanese, as you know, and get things out of you and be very easy. And so, indeed, he's a natural communicator.
Japanese are not great communicators. Japanese operate within their consensus, and when they get dropped out of the consensus and get into a dialogue with other cultures, it's tough because they don't feel they have the authority to make independent decisions. So even many of us who have Japanese friends whom we value, the problem of communication is very difficult. Morita could conduct a dialogue, and while he was a very patriotic Japanese and was a very strong defender of the basic Japanese point of view, he could communicate it in a way that was meaningful to non-Japanese.
A typical event where I experienced Mr. Morita's energy was after a long, tiring trip in Eastern Europe, flying into Eastern Germany. I pick him up at the airport. He comes out of the airplane. He grabs me and says, "You're going to start in a week your job as president of Sony Corporation of America, and this is what I want you to do." And these were not easy tasks, and these were complicated messages, but they all excited you to do 300% rather than your usual 120%.
Some people who knew Morita may have thought that he was always thinking of Sony. He was always talking about Sony whenever we're talking about the U.S.-Japan relationship or future of the global economy. Actually, in fact, he could not, in his own mind, separate the national interest, global interest, and Sony's business. Actually, he felt that being successful, for Sony to be successful, would be good for Japanese economy, good for U.S.-Japan economic relationship, or even U.S. economy.
I was very much aware that he represented Sony, but it wasn't a hard sell, and it wasn't that he talked about Sony first. He talked about the general problems first, and in that context, since his life was Sony, I learned what there was to learn about Sony. But he did not in any obtrusive way, and he didn't make you feel that he was doing this primarily for Sony. Of course, I bought all the equipment he had, but I'm sure the profits of Sony did not depend on what I did in my home.